Hi friends, it's your girl Harpo. Welcome to this episode of Brown Girl Guilt titled Unapologetically Me. Now, that's something that I'm trying to get better and better at every single day. First of all, embracing who I am and just learning who I am, and then unapologetically showing up as myself in every place, every capacity, and every space. It's actually hard sometimes to get to learn who you are. I think that the greatest undertaking of my life has been this journey and this practice of learning just who I am and showing up as that person every single day, despite how hard it is. And it is hard. It's really hard to show up as your full, authentic expression in almost every situation and be so true to who you are. Because for me, at least, I think that when I'm being myself is when I'm being the best version of myself. It can be really hard, but what can make it a little bit easier is having examples of people around you who are also really committed to learning who they are and showing up as themselves authentically and unapologetically. The guest for this episode, Horsepowar, is also an example of somebody who is trying really hard every single day to show up as themselves, as an unapologetic version of themselves. And when I say unapologetic, I mean someone who is not going to hold back and make apologies for their fullest expression. In this episode, I got to learn so much about Horsepowar and Jasleen. And in the process, I got to learn a lot about myself and where I might still be holding back when it comes to really fully showing up as myself, and really succeeding at that project that I've taken on, which is to get to know who Harpo really is. And I guess what you'll find as you listen to this episode along the way is that it takes a lot of conviction and it takes a lot of love for yourself and standing in the face of emotions like shame and guilt to truly embrace who you are. And so, this episode is going to be a full ride of what it means to fully unapologetically be yourself. And as well as you're learning about Jasleen, Horsepowar, and even Harpo, I hope that you're able to learn more about yourself as well. Hi, Horsepowar. Welcome to the Brown Girl Guild podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited. I literally sent you a DM over a year ago. And at the time, we didn't know each other. We weren't like I was following you, but we hadn't met in real life yet. And I sent you a message and I was like, I just think you're so cool. And I just want to be your friend one day. And I'm so happy that, this version of me gets to sit down and record a podcast episode with you.
I'm very flattered. And I remember you at 5X mentioning that. And I was like, shit, I got to go back and read this message because I didn't realize, I didn't put the pieces together. Sometimes I get
Yeah.
really sweet messages from other South Asian women who are like, you're fucking funny and cool. And it makes me want to be more myself. And I was like, damn. That's so sweet, but it's so cool to actually meet them and meet you and see you flourish in your ways and you killed it at 5X putting that festival together. So that was really sweet.
Oh, thank you so much. And that's exactly why I also felt so connected and drawn to you and why I even sent that message was because I was like, I think at that time it was where I was still kind of learning, like, okay, how much of me do I want to show up as in the world? And I was like, there is somebody who is doing it so phenomenally and she's so cool, so funny. Like she's just so unapologetically her. And that's the title of this episode, Unapologetically Me. And I was like, oh my God, like I get inspired and I have the courage to be more myself when I see Horsepowar being so much of herself. And you're so good at being you. Have you always been that good at being you? Or, whether that's Jasleen or Horsepowar. And if it hasn't been, I really want to ask you what that journey's been like.
Yeah, that's a good question. But also, thank you so much. It's like kind of, I think I'm also like PMSing. So my emotional, roller coaster, like I'm about to cry. I think who I was as a child, if I bring it back to when I was really young, I was very terrified of everybody. I was so shy. I was afraid of my musty. I could not do anything in dance or sing, which I loved, in front of people. Even if it was my siblings in the living room, I would immediately stop. But when they left, I would start being myself again. But I think when I really became comfortable with being myself, I think that happened at some point after I started taking dance lessons, and we were
Mm.
forced to, well, not forced, but like we had a couple year-end recitals, and I would have to go on stage in front of people and push yourself in that realm. And so I feel like that kind of probably was what made me become more like comfortable with showcasing what the inner workings of Jocelyn were. But I don't know, like I feel like to this day I'm still working on it. And I think that people think you have it together, not just, me, but anyone who puts themselves out there. I think people assume like, "Oh, they don't care. They don't care what people think." But my mind is always working like against each other and with each other. It's just like, "Oh, I care, I care, I care." And then you're like, "Fuck it, I don't care." And then you're like, "Wait, people are going to think this about me." But then you kind of have to just you see the fear and you kind of got to just run through it. And then when you get to the other side, you're like, "Ah, no one actually cares about anything at the end of the day,
Mhm.
unless it's about themselves." So people might, see me post on Instagram something really goofy that they would think, I would never post that. I've had so many people come up to me and try to compliment me by saying something like, "Oh my God, you're so brave," because I could never post that. And I'm like, I get that you're trying to say that's a compliment, but in my mind, I'm reading it as like, you're doing some dumbass shit. I would never do that, but cool. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm like, "Okay, cool." But to this day, like, I freak out a little bit every time, but I have to understand that it's, like, not that serious. Life is a joke, and we're all gonna die. That's my theory.
Dead
It's
ass.
a
First
little morbid, but I think, it helps.
Yeah. First of all, I cannot even believe that you were a shy kid. I literally in my head was like, "Oh, she's always been like this," right? Like, but
Mm-mm.
then I also realized that no, man, trauma happens to us, shit happens to us. We end up like a part of us when that we were born as literally gets lost in the sauce somehow, and then life is mostly just about coming back to who we are before we got lost in the sauce. But it's true, like even when I was trying to come up with like the name of this episode or the flow of this episode, I was like, should I title it Stay Weird? But I was like, but no, she's not weird. And none of us when we're truly authentically being ourselves is weird. And I really want to challenge like even that notion of like when you're being yourself, you're embracing weird. No, I'm actually just embracing my authentic self and who the fuck I
Mhm.
am. And that doesn't make me weird. It actually makes us weird when we're not embracing our truest nature. And I feel
Mhm.
like I struggle a lot with that back and forth within my heart too, because I feel like I'm really close to the threshold and I just need to keep pushing. And then once I get past that line, I'll truly be able to show up as my authentic self to the world. But often I feel like I'm wrestling so hard between like, do I want to be my fullest self or not? And what's the price that I'm going to pay when I'm not fully showing up? Like, misalignment sucks. Like, I feel like I always say the wrong shit and the dumbest shit when I am misaligned. But when I'm truly being myself, I know I'm cool. Like, I know I'm likable, but only when I'm truly being myself and not pretending to be anybody else. When I'm pretending is when I really mess up.
Mhm. Yeah, I think we get stuck in this idea of what it's supposed to look like. And I also realize like people yeah, like I like that you think that the stay weird was a weird a weird title to have because I do identify as being weird because I've understood that people don't want to always put their whole heart on their sleeve and walk around with it, and that is weird because that's a form of protection. But in a daily basis, like I know I'm hyper online and even in person when you meet me at like a show or whatever situation, but for the most part I'm kind of like pretty chill. And I would
Hmm.
say like the best way to describe myself, what I realized was like I'm kind of like an accordion. Like when you make the sound, you extend and then you have to decompress and come together. And there's been so many instances where like I don't actually like being social. I don't actually like talking out loud. I'm very quiet in certain aspects. But then when I need to extend and be vocal or like be that loud person that I think a lot of people see me as, it's taken me decompressing in order to rebuild that fuel that I will need. And like if I play a show, I kind of feel like I leave my heart on the stage and then I don't even really want to kick it at the after party. And sometimes I feel like I can't even drink or like schmooze with people because I've just like, oh, I did what I had to do and Now I'm like that
Mhm.
boring. It's funny when people are like, "Oh, you were so hyper on stage. Like, what happened to you?" And I was like, "Well, you know, it's not like a show I put on, but I'm just multifaceted and I'm like layered, and I also am a Pisces where I feel like people assume that like I'm going back on the horoscope tip all the time, but people assume that like, oh, because I'm this goofball online that I'm like permanently this goofball, but I can be sassy and sad quite easily, and then that makes me not want to be this loud person. But I also think a lot of it is associated with shame and guilt that for
Mhm.
some reason, I think it has to do with the fact that I had really good older siblings in my life to like help me understand who I am through like reflecting who they are and seeing what they had to go through to play with like the South Asian child role where it's like you lie half your life if you want to live the life that you want to live, because for some reason, the way we show love in family dynamics in like in most cases, not all cases, is like a very like everything is a formality, I feel like in
Mhm.
Disney culture. So it's like you're supposed to do this because of this. And so I think witnessing my siblings kind of interact, and then also having like my older brother, the I have two older brothers and a sister. And the one
Mhm.
who's like, I hate that I'm even gonna say this, but I think people assume that like when I talk about my older brother, sometimes it's the one who has passed away. But then I'm like, no, 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 the one who's alive, because then that's kind of more. My
Yeah.
humor is like very morbid, which is like probably definitely the trauma, which I'm grateful for. But the one, my brother who's alive, who I have learned so much from, he definitely was like pushing boundaries growing up, and he was so honest, like to the point where I was like, "Mikey, just lie about what you're doing." And he's like, "No, I
Mhm.
can't lie." And I had really good examples to show me like what it is to be a powerful person. And then also during like when I started going to Cafe du Soleil, which is a cafe in Commercial Drive, they had every Monday night a poetry slam, and this changed my life. And for like 2 years, my brother would take me and he would bribe me. He'd be like, "Justin, I'll give you $50 to go on stage and read your poems." And I'd bring my book with me. I had poems, but I could never muster up the courage to get up on stage. The fear was there. It's scary to put yourself out there. You're talking your own words that mean so much to you, and it is a competition. So people are going to judge you for your feelings. And you're like, "Nah, that's too much weight." But eventually, my brother, he brought me there enough to build confidence. And one day I got up and I read, and I feel like that was also another shift where I felt like I became my authentic self in a space where like was very accepting. It's hard to be your authentic self if you're not put in situations and environments that are accepting. Like a lot of our places are very filled with judgment, but like the commercial drive essence is like, weirdo central, if we're going to use the term weird, because
Yeah.
there's an eclectic group of people, and like they all, they're all, a lot of them were white. And I feel like that's just like a predominant thing in like Vancouver. It's like white and Asian, but a lot of them were white, but they were all very interesting people. And I think even though I thought I was very like basic, I was just little Punjabi girl from Richmond taking the Sky Train or going with my brother. I'm not allowed to do shit. Like have to lie about stuff. And these people are just unapologetically themselves and talking about sex and all these crazy things that I was like, I would never hear this in any other circumstance. But to them, I was so punk. I was so badass because I was this little Punjabi girl coming from Richmond, lying about things and being like, yeah, my dad low key looks like Saddam Hussein. And then they'd be like, oh shit. And like for them, I didn't realize that my act of rebellion was seen as punk, when I thought they were punk. And you never really think
Mm.
like a Punjabi girl who is expressing herself is considered such a badass. But they put me on this like pedestal that I think was like somewhat deserving. It's never good to put people on pedestals, but they put me on this slight pedestal where they're like, Jocelyn is like, she's so badass. And that really helped me feel more comfortable to be authentic, was to find myself in situations and put myself in places that is an eclectic group of people, but they were all so welcoming. And you can find those kind of groups with like creative spaces. I feel like theater class. It was all these kids who were like, "Yes, we believe in in drama and spectacle, and sometimes they were nerds. And my friends were all the basketball girls in high school, and they were all tough and we're cool, and we win. But there's no competition in theater. I was like, we love and we cry here, and it was a it was a safe place. Whereas, like, so I think like a huge part of where you can develop authenticity is putting yourself in position and places that like feel nerve-wracking, because you you don't know what kind of people they are, but like a mix of people. And I would always do like these writing camps. So once I started going to like that Cafe du Soleil to do poetry, I made it on the youth slam team of 2009, which was pretty cool. It was like top 4 kids. And
Mm.
then there would just be like writing camps everywhere, and I would just go to them, and you would meet so many kids from like Burnaby, Vancouver, Richmond, Surrey. Well, like I don't know if many kids actually from Surrey would be there, but I feel like I did meet here and there like an eclectic group of people that came from different parts with different stories to share. And it was like kind of nerdy, but in the end you build this confidence in yourself. And I think like all these little steps of putting yourself in challenging places that seem at first challenging, but actually they're the most accepting, because people are just there to like support, and there's no competition. I don't even know if that was the
Mhm.
answer to your question, but I just be
No, it
ranting.
it totally was, and you said so many things that I was like, "Okay, this." First of all, I wanna say that the Pisces is my favorite zodiac sign, so this makes a lot of
Wait, what are
sense.
you? What
I'm
do
a
you
Libra. I'm a Libra.
Okay, okay.
So Pisces and Libra, I think that they vibe really well together. And just in general, I love Pisces. I think that they're so dope. So that makes a lot of sense. But I think there's so many things that you touched on, and I want to go in order of like how I heard them. I think the first thing was that, like we are multidimensional, multifaceted beings, and really loving yourself unapologetically means really accepting and loving all those parts of you, and and embracing the fact that you don't have to show up as just that one version of you to the world, but that it is okay for you to be all those things. And I feel like I've definitely felt that in the past too. It wasn't until I started to live on my own when I was away for school in Montreal and I lived by myself, I had no roommate, that I was like, "Oh, I'm actually a quiet person. I like being quiet. I don't necessarily like going out every night or every day." And I think the pandemic also really strengthened that too. So I think that we have to embrace different versions of ourselves first and foremost, and then we're able to embrace different versions of other people. And I think that the other thing that I really, really liked what you were talking about was, how you had examples of strong people in your life who were being unapologetically themselves. I always think back to, how I grew up, and I always think that there weren't that many examples of people who really loved themselves in my life. And I always think how different, like how vastly different my life would be right now if I did have those examples. And, self love wasn't something that I had to actively teach myself without models, but something that I could teach myself with healthy models. And it's so important for us to have strong people in our lives who have the conviction to like really show up as their authentic selves. And I think we're actively doing that in how we show up in our specific spaces.
Mhm.
How I show up as Harpo in the Brown Girl Guild podcast at 5X, and just in my general daily life. But even you showing up as Horsepower so authentically, I think that's exactly why it makes it so important for you to be that person, who is so unapologetically themselves, because whether we know it or not, people are always watching us. And there's this quote that I love, and it goes, when you start to shine your light, you automatically give permission to everybody that's watching you that, you are also allowed to share your own light. And I think that the shame and the guilt that we hold, that you so beautifully spoke about, is so deeply embedded in us that we are shameful and we feel guilty when we are being ourselves. But, that like it's such an unhappy life to live when you are carrying around so much shame and guilt around like who the hell you actually are. Like, why are we so programmed to feel so guilty and so shameful for just being who we are? And I think that the courage, I think, is the medicine that heals shame. For me, it's really important that I show up as courageous as I can possibly be in the face of that shame and in that guilt. And I think part of who I truly am trying to be and like show up as is part of that, right? It's part of holding that courage. And that's why I also said that in the beginning, that like seeing you being so much of yourself gave me the courage to be myself. Like sometimes I catch myself thinking like, okay, if Jasleen can unapologetically shake her ass on Instagram, she can talk about period shits, and she can just like be her hilarious self to the world. I can do that one thing and just be myself and not necessarily have to be so concerned about what people are going to think, because she is being herself and I am enjoying it. I am embracing it. And actually, what it's doing is it's telling me inside of my heart, that I don't have to be shameful for who I am, because look, there's an example right there of someone that who's not being shameful of who they are.
Thank you. That's so sweet. I do think that because I don't know, this is like a side note. I think I don't know if it was like bullying exactly, but I do things that made people growing up like laugh at me openly. Like I would, be in the theater program or write about I had humor, so I would showcase it. And then at certain times, people would take that as an opportunity to like judge and poke fun because they were afraid that they like, people just do that when they like know that they can't do that themselves, and then they poke
Hmm.
fun. But then I started using self-deprecation as as a form of like narcissism in a way, or like self-belief building, because I would just then take the joke that they would say and I would make it upon myself before they could say it. And like I think that's a huge coping mechanism to like what people do all the time. And sometimes it's hard to see someone do that because you're like, oh, don't put yourself down. It's like now I wouldn't do that as much. But back in the day, growing up, I definitely was like, oh, I know you guys are going to make fun of me for liking this and that and doing this and that. So I am going to just do it first. And then I think I started doing that so much. And I think my sense of humor also was really, it changed because of the
Hmm.
loss of my brother and a couple other things that really traumatized and shaped my childhood. And I think I found like a place of, I don't know, like compassion for myself, but also just like I just relished in the trauma while it happened. Like we talked about not shaming and guilting. It's like you feel certain things, and I think the reason why we shame ourselves for feeling whatever emotion we feel is because maybe society tells us that these emotions are quote unquote bad and these emotions
Hmm.
are good and these emotions are unhealthy and these ones are healthy. And it's like, well, if I feel these bad and unhealthy emotions and thoughts are coming into my mind, I can't really control how I feel. However, they still exist whether or not you tell me that this is not what I should be feeling. So why not be like fully encompassed in the feeling and let it pass through? And I think like after dealing with the loss of my brother, I was going to like the school counselor and other therapy at a really young age. And I think I was open to tools and ways of thinking that not everyone utilizes when they're growing up because A, you feel like you're just a kid, you don't know anything, and why do you need to go to therapy or whatever. And but
Hmm.
at that time I really needed it. And so I just accepted the sadness or the pain as for what it was, and I was like, I'm just gonna sit in it. And I do think that there is a thing about the Pisces where we love to feel emotion to the greatest degree, and it's almost like sometimes even now I catch myself like almost like, am I addicted to the pain? Am I addicted to the sadness or feeling every emotion to its fullest? Because
Hmm.
I will sit in the pain, but at the same time, that only allows me to move past the pain or the sadness. And I feel like a lot of people don't even want to attempt to even go through that, but then you stay stagnant and you don't grow and evolve and see past that and see that these actually give you more colors to add to your coloring box. Like at the end of the day, every bad thing or thing that I really disliked that happened to me or my family in life, I'm actually oddly grateful. Like the loss of my brother,
Hmm.
of course I would in a million years, like I would change if I could and bring him back. But the course of the matter is that that is what happened. And you come to some sort of acceptance and coping. But at the same time, I'm like, I would not be Horsepower. I would not have stepped foot into a drama class, which led me to go get my BFA in theater, which led me to write rhymes, which led me to, playing shows and being this person that everyone thinks is like got her shit together and is like so down. But it's like it was through the darkness that I was able to catapult myself into light. And it's still an ongoing journey, but it's like you have to accept your feelings as what they are. And I think a lot of us are afraid to sit and relish in that moment because it hurts. And if we can distract ourselves, maybe we think that that's a solution, but it's actually not, because it's going to come back up again. So I think embracing that to its fullest degree is like key to being able to be ridding yourself of the shame and the guilt, because you're like, I feel how I feel and I can't control it. Let me just fucking sit in it and see what I learn. And you're going to learn
Mhm.
something regardless.
Yeah, right. Go through it, grow through it is what I always tell myself when I'm like, I don't want to sit in this, man. It sucks. I don't want to be here. But I'm like, nope, Harpo, you're going to grow once you go through it. And we can't like shut ourselves off either by, like moving through the world and not wanting to experience pain or hurt. It's inevitable that we're going to experience pain and hurt, but it's how much we are able to really sit with it and what we do with it. And you said something that I was really wondering too is like, there was obviously a shift, right? Maybe it was a gradual shift, or maybe it was like a, I don't know, we're gonna find out. But you did transition into horsepower, and it feels like there was an accumulation of a lot that kind of pushed you into that role. And I was gonna ask you, like, when did you become horsepower? Like, when did that come? And was it like a conscious decision, or do you feel like, because sometimes I feel like everything in my life has been preparing me to be Harpo. Like my full name is Harpreet, and I haven't
Hmm.
been called Harpreet in maybe like 3, 4 years. And anytime that like somebody calls me, that's usually at the yoga studio, because they're like, that's the name that I registered as like a few years ago.
Hmm.
But anytime that I'm called Harpreet now, it's really jarring. I'm like, oh my God, who is she? Like, I don't even know who she is. So it's taken, I feel like I've been being prepared my whole life to be Harpo. And I wonder, like, has it felt like that for you too, to become horsepower? Were you being prepared for it? And when did it like conscious? Did you make a conscious decision? When did it happen?
Yeah, I think definitely agree with like all your life's work prepares you for this exact moment of the present. And like I gave myself the name Horsepower when looking for like a SoundCloud alias when I think it was like 2013. I was second year university, I believe, and like I had a couple raps that I was working on that were just like written in my like Word document, and I was at UVic, which is all white people, and
Mhm.
and I think at the time I was like, I think there was moments where I wanted to assimilate. I wanted to like know what it was like to be looking at life through blue eyes and like the simplest form. Like I always wanted like this part of whiteness to be attached to, oddly. And then there was a shift in, I don't know what exactly was the shift and when I really started to feel the empowerment, but like I started to really dig into being a Punjabi girl living in a crazy world, which for me was like UVic, all white. Like I would like men who were all like typically white, and I could just tell the difference of the attention they would give me versus the attention they would give like a white girl who, to be kind of narcissistic and mean, like not as cool as me, not as much not as much character, not as much like I would have great conversations with these guys, and I was always seen as like almost like, oh, the risque choice, or like
Mhm.
the side girl. Like I don't even want to call myself that, but it was like, oh, I would never be like the girl that they would date. I'd be the girl that they would talk to about all the things that they liked, probably hook up with, but I would never be the one that they would be like, that's my girlfriend. And I noticed this
Mhm.
like thing, and then instead of finding assimilation within the white community, I was like, "Oh, fuck this. I'm going full brown, loud, and proud." And I started
Yeah.
wearing like my suits to school.
Oh my
And
God,
I
I love
remember
that.
on campus, I would wear like my I remember one day I fully wore a whole suit. I wore a bindi, I wore a pajama suit, I wore the chunni, and I had sneakers on. And I remember going to the liquor store right after class and getting a 6 pack of Old Milwaukee's and like being like, I don't give a fuck in this white place. But then there were times where I would wear like my Adidas track pants and like the suit shirt, and then like a cool jacket, and I just started going to parties wearing that. And I was like, you know what? Why am I so like I have one of ones made, like this is huge. We have custom suits from India made for our body. And why am I fucking trying to wear Forever 21 and all these fast fashion companies that are like every girl is wearing? And I just started pulling up in like the most brown, as I'm like writing about being a brown Punjabi girl
Mhm.
living in a crazy world. And this is like the beginning of when I started making music. But I do remember seeing like other Punjabi girls or Indian girls on campus look at me like, this bitch is crazy. Like, I would never be caught wearing that. Because there were times where like you have like, a wedding that you go to, and then you got to go to like Save On or the mall real quick right after with your
And
mom.
we're
And then,
embarrassed, yeah.
yeah, there was that moment. And then I was like, nah, I'm going to school. I'm going to school like this. And I just remember feeling nervous, but then realizing that I like the shock factor. I like scaring people. And I think that also plays with the fact that, like, my humor was totally changed. Like, I would joke about death so much. And to the point, like, even to this day, I talk about death a lot. And my friend, we were at the club one time and I was like mentioning something about death. And he's like, you really gotta stop bringing up death at the weirdest places. He's like, "We're out right now. What are you doing?" And I was like, "Okay, I gotta be more mindful that not everyone is up to speed on the morbid humor, but I definitely like that shock factor. I like the drama. This is all rooted in the same person that was, who wanted to dance and be on stage, who wanted to talk about how they felt and talk about how her dad was like Saddam Hussein. Like that shit scared white people. And then growing up and then just being like, okay, I'm gonna wear my suit on campus and people are not even gonna understand what is happening. But no one ever
Mhm.
said anything. No one ever said, oh, what the fuck? No one was like overtly racist. I never really dealt with that. It was all really like subtle racism that I feel like was mainly
Mhm.
when it came down to like dating. And it was like the white boy vibe. And I was like, "Oh, you guys are just like," and they would never say it, but I felt it. And I was like, "I know my feelings aren't wrong, but I can't assume that you're fully being racist, but I don't even think you know you're being racist." And
Mhm.
then I was like, "Fuck white men." And then I like was against it. But now I'm at a place where I'm like, I don't even we had this conversation a lot where we're like, "Oh, white people this, white people that." But now I don't really say that, partially because I have some white family where I'm like, okay, not it's not like I don't want to be talking shit while like my niece and nephew are half white. I just want
Mhm.
to understand that like the way we are brought up and the conversations we can have can also bring light into things. But sometimes white people be doing some crazy shit, and I'm just like, ugh, white people
But it
behavior.
sounds
But
like it sounds like what you're saying is that, like, horsepower was, created out of, like, a place of many things, right? Like the first word that comes to my mind is like a kind of resistance, and to
yeah.
kind of like push back at the internalized, even like vibe of assimilation, but then also maybe the outside external vibe that like nobody is not necessarily like they might not again be explicitly pushing it on us, but definitely we're feeling. But then also just like a bold like acceptance of like, you know what, I'm just gonna be myself, and I'm gonna maybe do it in a way where it's like makes you like you said, it's like it's going to be loud, it's going to be like really exaggerated, but I'm just gonna go with it because I feel like that's what's making me feel good to be myself. And I feel like that totally comes across in a very nuanced way now as who you are in this place in your life. And there's a line from a song that you're featured on with Jasmine Soundless. I think this is probably the first time that I got to hear you. It was
Mm.
it's a track by Intense, and there's a line
Mhm.
that says, "This ain't a riot, baby, it's a stampede," and I
Mhm.
love that line so much. I feel like I carry that line with me so much when I'm
Oh.
like moving through, because I think to myself like, a riot is something that I always feel like kind of happens and it goes away. But a stampede is like, I'm bulldozing in and I don't give a shit, you know?
Mhm.
And I feel like I was thinking a lot about this line just now, hearing you and how you kind of came into, this persona and this person that is Horsepower. But do you feel like Jasleen and Horsepower, are they the same person, or are they two sides of the same coin, you think?
Yeah, and I was just gonna touch base on one thing before I get to that answer is that like even the name itself, horsepower, like obviously it pulls from my last name Fawad, and I say it in like a very Western way, but like horsepower in a car is loud. It gives it its speed, and I didn't even put the two together until
Mm.
like recently. But it really is like that feeling of what, even also putting yourself and naming yourself horse is like, as a woman, is like people use that as like a derogatory term to describe like ugly, or like like something that's not as attractive, when horses actually are so majestic, noble, royal, beautiful.
Mhm.
And I remember a lot of times, like, being in one instance, I was at a studio and the guy was like, "Why is your name Horsepower? You should change it. Like that sounds so dumb." And I was just kind of like, "Hey, this is the worst way you could start off a studio session because I'm never coming back here again." But also, I like that men are intimidated with the fact that I'm so comfortable with associating that my beauty, my power is with of a horse. And like
Mhm.
people do use that as like a way to diss somebody, but I'm like, "Oh, no, you can't diss me," which is plays into the whole "I say the joke about myself before you can." It's like,
Right.
and like horsepower in a vehicle, it gives it its speed, and it gives it its push, and it's like, okay, that is the vibe that I think I want to give when it comes to my artistic self, is like, oh, I cannot be stopped. I am, just I'm gonna go for it. The speed, the power, it's all within me. But as
Mhm.
like, is horsepower the same person? And I totally think so. I think horsepower is just like the the more put together, in a sense, to rage, not like to start shit for fun, but just to like, I got somewhere to be in this lifetime and I'm gonna get there. This is my speed, this is my power. But Jocelyn is like, is the vessel. And at the end of the day, like, I feel like if I didn't even have either of those names and that identity, that I would still be both of what I carry. And I feel like names and labels, identity, like compartmentalizing who we are, all kind of like hinder our full selves, right? I feel like like labeling just like put something in a box, in a sense. And I feel like I am what I am, and we somehow have to like label it. But Justine, when she wakes up, no makeup, with pimple patches on her face, kind of sweaty, with a retainer in her mouth, is also horsepower, is also Justine. But then horsepower, who's on stage, who brings up her niece and nephew, is Justine, is
Mhm.
actually is Justine Bua, is Justine Mussy. Is like,
Yeah.
I and the thing that I feel so grateful for myself is that like I could be with my parents and my auntie and like my family members who don't really know like to the full extent of like how much I like to party and how much I like to swear and how much I like to reveal my body and feel sexual.
Mm,
But
mhm.
I'm still the same person that they get, that my homies get, and I don't really change who I am. Like, obviously you're not going to pick your nose in public, around people. So there's things that you do and you don't do in front of people. But I think who I am innately is like the same. And
Mhm.
I think horsepower is just like a maximized version who's spitting bars and talking in your face and has your attention for that 30 minutes that you paid to come see. But Jocelyn is
Mhm.
like, I also like to think that like everyone has the potential to be what they want to be and to be unique and individual. But at the same time, we are all like the same. And that's not a bad thing. Like, obviously we love to be individual and unique and feel special, but we all have a story that's worth sharing. And if you're willing to share it, good on you. But also, you don't have to share your story like to make it
Mhm.
value. And it's like, I want people to feel like, as much as we put people on pedestals and we find them remarkable, and you're like, oh, you're doing so amazing. It's like, but you also are doing amazing. Just because you're not on stage, just because you're not posting your life, just because
Yeah.
of whatever reason you're not, you know, being creative in a realm that's like, oh, this is art. You're creative in other ways. And I just want people to know that, like, individuality is great, but like there is something beautiful with relating to one another and seeing ourselves in another. Like, it's I like the idea, to be unique. And I think growing up, to find who I was very hell bent on being different, shocking people that I am this, and you could never do that. But at this point in my life, I'm like, no, we all can do it. And you're
Mhm.
remarkable and you're marvelous. And just, I hope you one day see that within what I see in you.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. We all get I think there's like a sense of competition even when we're trying to be ourselves. We're like, well, how much can I show that I'm really figuring it out and I've got it, you know?
Mhm.
So there's something that you said a little bit earlier that I really want to end off on because in my head, when I'm recording this episode, I say it all the time. I have a 17-year-old girl in my head, and I that's what I think is like, okay, so if a 17-year-old girl, brown girl, is listening to the episode, what do I want her to take away? And so there was something that you were talking about when it comes to spaces and, surrounding yourself with people who allow you to be your fullest self. And so many of us go through our lives, especially when we're like in our like teenage years or early 20s. And, sometimes like some of us like never stop doing this, but we surround ourselves with people who really hinder our growth. They hold us back. They make us feel all that shame and guilt, or um, you know, they don't allow us to be our fullest expressions. And there's something that my daddy always taught me, and she still says to my younger brother today, which is like your sangat is so important, right? Like this, your sangat basically means the community that you surround yourself with and the people
Mhm.
that you surround yourself with. And she says, your sangat is everything because it can either help you or it can either break you. And I think that when you're talking about really like electively choosing spaces that allow you to be your fullest self, that goes to like your friends, who you're actively spending leisure time with, recreational time with, the groups of people that you're participating with when it comes to like your workspace or like where you're creating, where you're hanging out, who you're partying with. All that is so important. And I wish I knew that when I was like in high school because I was always seeking validation from people like who, they were also just trying to figure it out. So I don't even like to say like the cool kids or the whatever because they were also just trying to figure it out. No one's really cool until you become an adult and learn who you actually are. um, but I felt like I was always seeking validation from people, and I didn't need to, And I feel like
Mhm.
if I had known that, I would have cultivated better, safer spaces for myself as opposed to looking outward for happiness and love and all these kinds of things. I would have just looked inside.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think also the biggest lesson is that like sometimes you're just gonna get burned, and I hope
Mhm.
you realize what is happening at the time and can kind of take a step back because we look so closely up close to the bigger picture, but when you really take a step back, you can see it all. But like sometimes you're gonna get burned by the people that you trust, and sometimes like you have to have these moments of like down in the gutter, down face like in the dirt of the arena, and you need to look up and realize that okay, this was a lesson to be learned. I can wallow in it, but that person was toxic. That person hurt my heart. That person broke my trust, and you have to take that. You have to like be aware of your surroundings and pick up people's social cues and like and tap into it in a way that like you can't just ignore it. And my dad is knocking on my door right now. This is what happens when you live at your parents' house.
That's okay.
But, no, I just feel like at the end of the day, you have to know that you're gonna get burned, and I think that people try to act like you're not gonna get burned.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, that's like what I was saying earlier, right? Like there's an inevitability that you're going to get hurt in life. And that, there's inevitability that, you're going to have your heart broken, you're going to lose friends, people are going to die. Like it's going to happen. We just have to make ourselves strong enough to be able to, A, like understand and sit with it, and then B, realize that it's okay for us to let go. But I just wanted to say thank you so much, Jasleen, for coming on the Brown Girl Guild podcast and, being so honest and so open about talking about what it means to be unapologetically yourself. I know that there's a version of me on the inside that, if I had the chance to listen to a conversation like this and to look up at someone, who in my world is someone so spectacular, like so full of, joy and just like humor and all these kinds of things, to hear that, like, okay, like, I can relate to her. Like she feels the same way that I feel sometimes, and she's gone through some of the same shit that I've been through. I feel like it would have again like changed me exponentially in how I navigate the world. And I'm so glad that there's people out there that are going to be able to hear this and actually get to have themselves validated and feel like they're not isolated in the experience. So thank you so much for coming on this episode and being so open to talking about just lean horsepower, all that stuff with me.
I just wanna end on this quote from my favorite, Jim Carrey, which really sat with me, and thank you for having me on your podcast. But he says, I wanted to convince the world I'm a miracle. And then I wanted to convince the world I'm just like them, which I thought just sat with me so well, where it's like, we're all miracles, we're all great. Just find what you love, commit to joy, and, take care of the people that take care of you.